Hello, and welcome to Books from Your Therapist, a podcast where we talk to therapists and mental health practitioners about their mental health related book recommendations. By mixing book talk with mental health, we hope to open up the conversation around books your therapist may have suggested and make them more accessible.
This podcast is not a substitute for mental health care. It's for educational and entertainment purposes only. I'm Amanda Throckmorton, a marriage and family therapist in California.
And I am Tara Kremen, and I work in the book industry in Toronto, in Canada. In this month's episode, we're talking to licensed social worker Nicholas Rissone. We talked to him about the books It's Not Always Depression, Working the Change Triangle to Listen to Your Body, Discover Core Emotions, and Connect to Your Authentic Self by Hilary Jacobs Hendel, and Decolonizing Therapy, Oppression, Historical Trauma, and Politicizing Your Practice by Dr. Jennifer Mullen.
In It's Not Always Depression, Hilary Jacobs Hendel tells stories of patients who came to see her seeking treatment for depression, but in fact, none of them were chemically depressed. Instead, she found that they all experienced traumas in their youth that caused them to put up emotional defenses that masqueraded as symptoms of depression. Jacobs Hendel writes about how she used the change triangle to lead these patients towards a more joyful and fulfilling life.
And Decolonizing Therapy is an essential work that centers colonial and historical trauma in a framework for healing. This book illuminates that all therapy is, and always has been, inherently political. To better understand the mental health oppression and institutional violence that exists today, we must become familiar with the root of disembodiment from our histories, homelands, and healing practices. Only then will readers see how colonial, historical, and intergenerational legacies have always played a role in the treatment of mental health. This was a really great conversation, albeit maybe a little bit of a heavy one at times, but these books really paired well together and I think are probably really essential reading for anyone interested in decolonizing your thinking, which everyone should be, but also just in learning a bit more about your emotions and putting names to them. So yeah, I thought it was a great conversation.
All right. Hello, Nick. Welcome to Books from Your Therapist.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here.
Would you mind just introducing yourself for listeners?
Like you said, my name's Nick. I'm an LSW in New Jersey. I've been practicing now for a little over 2 years, so I'm almost at that coveted LC. I go by he, him pronouns and identify as gay male. I also identify as neurodivergent. That is a very big part of my identity. You'll definitely pick up on that, I'm sure, in this little episode. And then specifically, I was thinking about it earlier before I came on here. I often go by more queer than gay. I just feel like it kind of captures beyond just the fact that I'm not straight, just kind of my personality, my politics, how I show up with people in community. So yeah, that's just kind of my quick little headline for me.
So you've been practicing for 2 years, which is impressive. I must say, when I found you on TikTok, I was like really drawn to your voice right away, and just the way that you explain things, I think is really amazing. So I'm like, you've been practicing for 2 years, and this is where you're at. Like, I just feel impressed right now.
Oh.
So I just have to say that. And I'm curious, like, what inspired you to become a therapist?
Mhm. Well, first of all, thank you so much. My ego loved that. Thank you. I appreciate that. I always like to reiterate too that the ability to re-record and edit helps a lot. But what I do appreciate that because I would love to go into teaching one day, and I'm super excited to be able to be a supervisor one day. So that's very affirming. So thank you.
Hmm.
But what inspired me, of course, like when anyone else, there's childhood trauma, and you have that kind of just natural, for the industry term, like parentification, which just made you really good at being attuned to people, attuned to others. So the foundation was there, but I don't think I like went into when people were like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I don't think therapist was there yet. It didn't really come into my periphery until I was like considering college in like late high school, and I was between psychology and fashion design, which is like okay. Uh, so I was looking at all these like really obscure schools that did both, and shocker, neither one is one where you can kind of have one foot in, one foot out. Both of those you kind of have to be very committed to. So I ended up going the fashion design route, and I went to FIT in New York. I got my associates in fashion design, got my bachelor's in marketing. Didn't end up seeing the fashion design thing all the way through because turns out you have to be very, 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 very detail oriented. And my brain, those like small, like an eighth of an inch, a quarter of an inch, you have to be, was not for me. So graduated around like 2019. And then, of course, COVID happened and like it shook everything else up, shook me up. And I was like, okay, I'm not resonating with this marketing thing. I was doing real estate. I was just like trying to figure out what I want to do. And between the pandemic, how much it was shaking everything up, and all the political unrest that was happening, it kind of forced me to like take inventory. What am I really interested in? What really gets me going? Because so many people were struggling. I had a lot of friends coming to me. I've always been that friend that has the advice, the listening. Again, shocker. And I was like, okay, I'm really good at this. People are telling me I'm good at this. I've always been kind of interested in quote unquote social justice, always been very engaged with that. Then someone introduced social work to me. I didn't know like you could go the therapist route with social work. And I was like, oh, this really captures like all these sides of me, like the listening, the politically engaged, socially justice informed, if you will.
Hmm.
um, but because I was bouncing around so much, it was fashion design, then marketing, and then real estate. I was like, let me just take a beat. I sat on it for a year. I was like, no, I think this is still what I want to do. Went into it, and when I tell you, it was like day one of social work school. I was like, oh, we found it. We are so
Mm.
back. Like we
Hmm.
found it, and that that kind of sums up how I got to where I want to be. Like I have, of course, you have days where like this shit is hard, but
Hmm.
not a day has gone by where I'm like, is this really what I want to do? Like I really love what I do. So that's kind of my story of how I got here and what really inspired me to end up where
Mm.
I'm at.
Yeah, I love this question because I'm always, everyone kind of has their own journey of
Mhm,
how they get into this work. And, some people will say, like, I was the friend that everyone wanted to talk to, or like, I've always had this inside of me, but it's taken some steps to kind of get there.
mhm,
Yeah, so I love to hear about it because I do find it's like, it's interesting the ways that people kind of like come into this work. So I
mhm,
appreciate you sharing. And we touched on it a little bit, but I found you on TikTok on my own like
mhm,
personal account and was really drawn to your voice and the way you explain things. And would you mind sharing a little bit about what that TikTok platform has been like for you and like
yeah.
how it's been like as a clinician on there?
Mhm. The TikTok thing just kind of started with one. I've always loved creating content. Before this, like I had a personal page where I would just create like funny skits. Like I had a character that was blowing up early in the pandemic. Like so I've always loved like just speaking to the camera and utilizing my creative side that way. But then I was like, okay, I also have this huge passion of mine. Like how can I integrate that? That's how the TikTok thing kind of started. I didn't really have an agenda at first. I just wanted to talk about this therapy thing I do. But then it started to kind of gain traction and I was like, okay, people are appreciating like how I explain things and so let me kind of keep going and I kind of started to find a formula, if you will, that worked for my page. And so how it's been going has been really like surprising. Like I guess I don't know if this is why like my supervisor told me that I'm the most requested therapist at the practice right now. So I'm like, that must be just people seeing, finding me, and then clicking on that request and intake form. So in terms of like just a business perspective, that has been, I think, because of that, pretty great. In terms of more just kind of a personal side to it, it's been really cool to again kind of get to humanize myself, be both educational but also just myself. And then with that, of course, it's never always sunshine and rainbows. Like, I was funny, like, before I hopped on here, I was like, one of my biggest pet peeves is being misinterpreted or people assuming what I'm saying because of something I didn't say.
Hmm.
Like, we're living in this era where we have to give like 50 disclaimers before we say what, otherwise, like, people are insinuating about your competency, your abilities, like
Yeah.
I made a video that I labeled as satire, that I recently posted, and about like sometimes therapy is just a long process for people and we need to adjust our expectations accordingly. And I had people insinuating that I'm holding my clients hostage, that I'm not like referring out when necessary, that I'm invalidating people's potential frustrations that come up along the way. And so, from a personal end, whether that's neurodivergence or just my own trauma history, that can be a bit triggering for me. But it's also become like a kind of like, this is something in yourself that like you kind of want to look at, like
Mm.
how can you work on that side of yourself without
Hmm.
reacting to people who are often already reacting from a reactive place.
Right.
um I think that it's like anything else, there are pros and cons to it. And then also just something that's been really cool is it's definitely impacted in a positive way my confidence and how I show up. Like, you're just by talking about something that you know about, it's reinforcing it up here. And then when
Yeah.
people are like, this is making sense, I like how you explained that. That's like, oh, that makes me feel good. That translates into the therapy room where I'm like, I show up more confidently with my clients.
Yeah, I mean, of course there's like a prickly side to the internet and I use prickly and like I feel like that's the most the softest word I could use. Like I can only
Mm-hmm.
imagine. Like
Mm-hmm.
I see yours and follow you and see the comments and stuff and it's yeah, there's no pleasing everyone. I can only imagine kind of like what that would bring up, but it sounds like you're like in a process with it. So it's like it's cool to hear. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it can be definitely prickly, especially just the nature of what we're talking about, like,
Hmm.
and how people
Hmm.
perceive therapists. They just assume like I'm gonna be attuned to you, like this stranger on on the internet. I'm like, if it's not for you, just you don't have to take it. You can scroll. It's okay.
Totally.
And just like a little reminder, you're like, I'm not your therapist.
Right.
Exactly. I think there's a therapist online who like that's one of their opening lines every time. It's like, I'm a therapist, I'm not your therapist, before
Hmm.
they say,
That's
I'm
good.
like, I think I might have to take that. That's
Hmm.
So speaking of you being not their therapist, but so who are you therapist for? Like, can you talk to us a little bit about the people you work with and where you work?
Mhm. I currently work for a private group practice. It's called Inner Clarity here in New Jersey, and we're spread out across North and Central Jersey, but of course, because we also do telehealth. I work with currently my youngest client is 16, and I think my oldest currently is in their 50s. So, but my sweet spot tends to be kind of mid 20s to early mid 40s, just from a rapport standpoint. That tends to be the sweet spot. And I'll work with anybody. I feel like the modalities I pull from, IFS and AEDP and coherence therapy, is really applicable to so many presenting concerns. The only clients I don't typically work with are very high risk clients. So, and that's also just kind of the practice policy. Like, I don't think we're working with anyone who presents with like schizophrenia or like severe active psychosis. Yeah, I really work with anyone, predominantly also people looking to process trauma. So yeah, that's kind of my sweet spot for who I tend to be working with.
Nice. And I'm excited to dig into the books that you picked. Before we do, is there anything else that you'd like to share about yourself, either professionally or personally, before we jump in?
Not really. I feel like you'll kind of pick up as who I am and my personality as we go. I try to show up as authentically as possible. I feel like I kind of started to lay it all out there. You'll kind of see as we go.
Keep it coming. Keep it coming.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's jump into your first book pick, which I was actually happy. Well, I love both books that you chose, but this book I've had for years. And
Mhm.
I think I had read like half of it or something like a couple years ago. And
Mhm.
like many therapy books, like I read part of it and then it like, I don't finish it
Mhm.
at some, and then you pick
Yep.
it back, right? Like
Yep.
that's just what we do. It's.
Mhm.
But I do have like a physical copy and my nails happen to match it right
Love
now, which I thought was
that.
pretty fun. And so, yeah, your first book that you chose was It's Not Always Depression by
Mhm.
Hilary Jacobs Hendel. Why did you choose this book?
So it was kind of, well, for one, I'm just a nerd. Like kind of like you said, like it was on my list. I think I had just not finished another book, and I was like, let me jump over here. And what specifically had that on my list was I was just trying to better understand AEDP as a modality. It can be a bit more abstract than other experiential therapies like IFS or EMDR. It's very relational. It's very attachment based, but it's also very complex. And so when I heard about It's Not Always Depression, I was like, oh, this is inspired by AEDP. And it kind of broke it down into a much more easily digestible understanding of the modality. Like, if anything, it was kind of like the AEDP books I was reading felt like more textbooks, and this just felt like kind of like a very effective, dense, but still digestible summary of it. So that's kind of how that ended up on my bookshelf.
For listeners that are like, what is that? Can you
Hmm.
just explain, like, briefly what AEDP is? Because I also like to kind of talk about the different modalities, and there's some that are super recognizable, but I can imagine someone being like, what is that?
Hmm. Yeah, so AEDP stands for Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy. So it's an attachment based and relational based modality. It's a lot about what's coming up actively in the room in real time, like all experiential therapies, but keeping it with a particular emphasis on the relationship. So someone who works primarily with AEDP will be asking a lot of questions like, like when I said that, I noticed, your chest seemed to get tight, and I'm wondering like how that landed for you. Like, how did you hear what I was saying just now? And when we're naming things that explicitly, stuff comes up fast for people. Defenses come to the front line really fast, or defenses melt really fast because we're not talking about things. It's like right here live and in the room. So that's where that kind of accelerated experiential dynamic kind of comes in. And then that dynamics, the D part of the acronym, considers the how the past is playing a role here. So the dynamics between the past and the present, the dynamics between the therapist and the clinician. So that's kind of a quick summary of
Hmm.
AEDP. And then what It's Not Always Depression really kind of hones in on is the change triangle. In formal AEDP, they refer to it as the triangle of experience. But it's just kind of a way of understanding how someone's feeling, maybe where we're at in the therapy process. And it's just kind of like a roadmap of how someone could be experiencing anything, which I could maybe go into more detail with that if you'd like.
Yeah,
Um,
because I wasn't completely unfamiliar with this. So yeah, if you could
mhm.
dive in for the listeners that are like me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Even as I'm saying it, I'm like, this is so abstract. The change triangle, just picture like an upside down triangle or a upside down pyramid, where at the bottom you have your core seven emotions. I might not remember them all. You have joy, anger, sadness or grief, surprise, disgust, and I think sexual excitement, and there's one more. For time's sake, I'm not even going to rack my brain. Each of these core emotions have an action tendency attached to them. So, we can, and it's not like super crazy to think about, like anger. Something needs to change. So I want you, like my body speaking to me, I want you to change something. Sadness, like I'm missing something. I want that back. Or I'm grieving something. Or disgust, like get whatever's in front of me away from me. And so when we are able to process these emotions to completion, even if we aren't able to actually complete the action tendency, even if we just get to put language to them, that's when we're able to actually process these emotions and live authentically as our true selves. Now, when that doesn't happen, we tend to go into the top right corner of the triangle, which is our inhibitory emotions. So we have anxiety, shame, and guilt. Shame saying, I am bad for whatever emotion I just experienced and I wasn't able to complete it. So I'm bad for having that. Or guilt, I did something bad for having that emotion, or maybe doing what that emotion made me want to do. Or anxiety, when you're not necessarily maybe internalizing any messaging like I did something bad or I am bad, but necessarily I just wasn't able to complete this emotion. And now you kind of have that like frozen, anxious state, like sensation or feeling. And obviously, these are intolerable experiences and emotions. We cannot be in this corner of the triangle for so long. So we will shift over then to the left side of the triangle, which is our defenses. And that's, I mean, that list can be infinite, but it tends to fall into anything that is to avoid these uncomfortable emotions or numbing so we don't feel them at all. But that is kind of what the triangle looks like.
Thanks for breaking that down because I think, especially when we're talking about it, I think it can be
Mm-hmm.
hard to visualize. So I love that you actually were making the triangle with your hand and
Mm-hmm.
explaining it because in the physical book,
Mm-hmm.
it's in there a lot. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
like a bunch of sections where you can kind of like do it yourself, which I think is
Yep.
like, it's, that's part of the experiential part is right. The book is like, you're doing it, right? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
I think talking about it can be hard to understand. So I appreciate you breaking that down. Do you use this frequently in your sessions with clients? Like, how does this come up in your work?
So for me, it's kind of a good grounding place, like especially doing trauma work, especially doing complex trauma work. It's very easy to get lost in the weeds. So for me personally, sometimes I'll just be like, come back to the triangle, like where is this person at? And because I'm also IFS informed, you could have someone with multiple parts at different points on the triangle. So it's kind of a way for me to ground myself clinically. Oftentimes you will also have clients coming in, and just a big point of distress for them is I don't understand myself. I don't understand how I'm feeling, what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling that. And so this is just kind of a very practical tool that I will just give them if they ask for it or if it's clinically sound, and say, this is something you could easily bring into your day to day. It's very practical and people get it pretty quickly. And so it's just also a good tool for someone to ground themselves outside of sessions too and understand what's happening and how to help themselves, whether that's just asking like, where am I on the triangle? Okay, I'm feeling like angry. Okay, so maybe I'm at the bottom. What does my anger want me to do? Okay, it wants me to, I don't know, slug my coworker in the face. Okay, I can't go do that, but can I maybe give myself some space to just, whether that's talking to myself out loud, just can I just articulate these feelings? Can I validate these feelings for myself? Okay, is that helping? Okay, I'm not going into that other corner of anxiety, guilt, and shame. Like I can actually feel myself coming down.
I think this book does a really good job of showing how fantasy can be used in sessions as well.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like, so just to break down for listeners, the author brings in some case studies of how
Mm-hmm.
she's worked with previous clients and like your example of anger that you just shared is a great one because maybe if you're working with a therapist that's holding space for you to explore that anger, you can
Mm-hmm.
sit with someone and they can guide you like, what would it feel like to slug that coworker in the face, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that, I think this is where the relational piece is really healing in this model is like I imagine you can do this on your by yourself outside of session, but to have someone sit with you and be like, we know that realistically you're not going to go do this, but for a
Mm-hmm.
moment, can we talk and feel into what that might feel like? And if you can release that anger, like I think this book did a really good job of explaining and showing how in therapy we can use fantasy as a way to kind of like help and work through our emotions.
Oh, absolutely. And what I think is is fascinating is the brain can often like have a very hard time, if not entirely, cannot differentiate like when we are imagining versus if it was real. A good example, like I'll say to clients, is like I'll encourage that imaginal work, and you can see the kind of like what are we doing? Like we're just
Mhm.
making believe. Like this is
Yeah.
like what this sounds very wooey. And then I'll introduce that part, like neuroscience aspect that the brain cannot differentiate that. And I'll say, like, do you ever have those moments when you're alone at home and maybe you imagine like an argument that didn't get completed, or maybe just a person you don't like, and suddenly before you know it, you are talking out loud and you're like, screw that person, blah, 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 blah. And this situation never happened, but in your body, it feels real and it feels like you're there and it can get elevated real fast. Like, well, that's what we can do here. And when I break it down like that, people start to be like, okay, yeah, no, we have those experiences. I've done that. And so it can start to become a very safe and effective way of processing these emotions. And I remember in the book, it actually had a case study that was exactly that. A young part of a client came up and was like, I just want to slug my father. And then a more grown part was like, no, we don't do that. And the therapist first worked with the grown part and was like, this isn't actually what we're going to do. Of course, we would never do this in real life, but would it be okay if this young part of you, we can just be with that, validate that, and let her slug her father? Like, and the client did it, and it ended up in the book being a really effective clinical work. I heard other experiential modalities being pulled in there. I was like, this sounds like some IFS and AEDP happening at once, especially that more imaginal component.
And for listeners that might not know what IFS is, that's internal family systems. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
essentially the idea that we are multidimensional. We're not just one mind. So we
Mm-hmm.
have different parts that are going to show up in different aspects of our life. So it's kind of a but like we actually haven't covered any IFS books on the podcast yet, which I'm surprised because
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like a hot thing right now.
Yep.
Psychology, I feel like really goes through different waves where things kind of dominate, and IFS is just a really big one. So I just wanted to give
Mm-hmm.
a little brief explanation of what that is as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like when I was coming into grad school, like CBT was kind of starting to be on its way out. Like when I was
Hmm.
considering grad school, like everyone was talking about CBT. And now it's definitely, I could talk a lot about CBT.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I feel like the experiential modalities, especially IFS and EMDR,
Hmm.
are definitely in their it girl era
Hmm.
right now.
Totally. Totally. Back into like the change triangle, the
Mhm.
author emphasizes that core emotions are not the problem, that our
Mhm.
defenses and inhibitory emotions are. What does this mean?
I always like to normalize and validate things. Like, not necessarily that they are a problem, because they're often just the result of someone just being at where they're at and the tools they have currently. But I think what the author is touching upon is that it can prevent us from living authentic lives and being our most authentic selves. And so if we are constantly, or which most of us are, just day to day in that kind of D corner of the triangle with our defenses, we can be kind of closed off from the rest of the world and from relationships. And of course, we are a social species. That's how we've just survived and evolved. So that kind of prevents us from being able to connect with ourselves and others. And then, of course, inhibitory emotions are, other than they're just objectively uncomfortable, they can bring a lot of just outright health complications. Someone who's chronically anxious, chronic with living with that chronic toxic shame, like that leads to chronic inflammation, which leads to just a wealth of physical health problems. I think that that's what the author is touching on when she says that those are the problem. And I don't want to, like, that's not to talk badly. I think she does in the book such a beautiful job of normalizing every part of the triangle, wherever someone might be. But I think that's what she means by that. And something to clarify, because I didn't get it until the end of the book, is that someone can have core emotions, but they're actually they're still in the D part of the triangle. And how she conceptualized that was kind of looking at is the how the core emotion is being experienced, is it proportional to the situation at hand? So I think an example in the book, she, like, a client came in very angry because her parents were getting divorced. And so at face value, it's like, yeah, that just sounds like a core emotion. Who wouldn't be somewhat angry about that? But then the therapist kind of did some therapeutic work, and that anger was saying things like, oh, like they don't care about me, and like the significance of their relationship for me. And so that's how the therapist was able to differentiate, like, oh, this sounds defensive, this doesn't, even though this looks like a core emotion, it's being experienced as one, anger, it's not necessarily as reflective of just objective reality. So I just kind of wanted to throw that disclaimer in there too, because I think that can be a little confusing. It's like, this feels like a core emotion, but it's also just so uncomfortable and big. Like, so if it's really uncomfortable and big, then it's likely more of a defensive emotion rather than a core one.
Yeah, it kind of leads well into our next question is if somebody's struggling with like identifying or even naming those
Mm-hmm.
core emotions, how would you guide them using this triangle framework?
Mm-hmm. So, what I will do, one of my favorite questions to ask someone is, can you teach me to have this experience right now? Let's say someone is describing an interpersonal conflict and they're like, I don't know how I feel, but if I had to teach you how to have it, it's like, this person, like, I cannot believe they said this to me. They made me like think like you don't want to be my friend, and etc. They'll go on and on. And I'll kind of use my just understanding of emotions. I'll be like, okay, I'm hearing some sadness, I'm hearing some anger, I'm hearing some disgust. And then I'll kind of reflect that back. And I'll bring in some psycho ed as well. So I might say something like, okay, your friend made a comment about your outfit, right? And that made you want to, it sounds like you wanted to get away from your friend in that moment. Like, would it be fair to say that maybe they disgusted you? Because when we're disgusted, we want whatever's in front of us to get away from us, or for us to remove ourselves from that. And then, so if I reflect that back and it resonates, and they'll say, like, yeah, that makes sense. I'll say, so would it be fair to say that you were disgusted in this moment? So that's kind of a way I will help walk someone through that experience while still making sure it's authentic for them. Like, I never want to just be like, oh, you were disgusted. Like, that's where that, like, can you teach me how to have this experience or feeling that you're having?
I love that. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you teach me how to have this experience? That's really great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it can be a little abstract. So sometimes, like, these experiential questions, people can be like, dude, what? Like, these are just not how we talk with people in our day to day. So sometimes I might have to even then model that for someone.
So once you've helped guide somebody through to sort of naming the emotion that they're going through, this book talks a little bit about emotion and where it resonates in your body. So
Mhm.
what's the next step then for you to help somebody feel the emotion,
Mhm.
and why is it important to sort of listen to your body and that reaction?
Oh, this is a big one because I just want to normalize. Like, I would say most people don't know how, like, this is a skill, like, interoception and mindfulness. That's a jargon. I just use jargon. Interoception is just someone's ability to not just feel, but almost communicate with their internal sensations. So that's a skill that is developed and is not encouraged in our just capitalistic culture of just go 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 go. So I always like to first normalize, like, we're not doing anything wrong, it's okay, it's understandable. If this is the case and someone's really closed off, we might spend some time just doing some like skill building. Like, can we just slow down? Can you just feel what the chair feels like under you? Can we just can you feel that? What's that feel like? In Even that can be clunky for people. They can feel like they're doing something wrong. So I'll just be like, it's okay if you could just be like, I feel like I'm supported. I'm upright. I'm like, great. That's a feeling. That's okay. And something I've noticed is that also as people just start to do it, it can come pretty quickly. So sometimes someone might say, I'm noticing just my stomach is tight. That's something we'll do first is just identifying sensation, not naming what emotion it is, not trying to be like, what's that sensation saying? It's just literally feeling it. And then we might deepen it a bit. And so I'll say, can you just start to talk to me in the present tense about something that came up that maybe triggered you? And then I'll say, okay, as you're talking about that, what do you just notice? And then they'll say, okay, my stomach is tight again. And I'll say, okay, did you notice when? At what point you were saying when your stomach got tight? Okay, yeah, it's when I was talking about when my friend insulted my outfit or made a comment about my outfit. I'm like, oh, okay. And so then we just connected that with, it sounds like disgust. So would it be fair to say, like, this belly sensation here is like a result of your disgust in that moment? And so then to kind of follow up with that second part of the question, why it's important is outside a session, like, clients start to pick up cues from inside. It's like, oh, I know what I'm feeling, I know where I'm feeling it, and I know what triggered it. So then clients start to be able to handle themselves with more understanding and more compassion. That's also why it's important, but I know that it can be clunky as hell for people starting and scary for clinicians too when clients are like, I don't know. And like, I think that's such a scary moment for therapists. So
Well,
yeah.
especially if you're like helping name emotions and then trying to because that, like you said, can sometimes seem abstract. And then where you're like, where is it in your body? And you're just like, I don't know,
Hmm.
my brain, I'm using my brain.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I don't think a lot of, and it's no one's fault, like, but I don't think a lot of therapists pick up on when someone says, I don't know, they're also kind of asking a how in that
mhm.
implicitly. Like, I think sometimes therapists will just reply even more abstractly and they'll be like, feel your feelings, you have to feel, and it's like they are asking how in that moment. So we need to really slow down.
Another like good piece with on this note is in the
Hmm.
book in the back, there's a list of different like sensation words and different words to express emotion, which I think is super helpful because I don't know, I just think our vocabulary around what we're feeling can be quite limited. So I think that's
Hmm.
also like a nice, guide to have those words available to be like, oh yeah, I'm feeling this like tenseness or I'm feeling soft, right? Like all these
Hmm.
different words that you wouldn't think that could apply to sensation are actually there for you to use for sensation.
Hmm. Oh yeah, that's making me think of a big, and it just speaks to how great this book is, keeping it so accessible and experiential for people. I love I don't know if you've seen it, the sensations wheel. It's kind of like your typical feelings wheel, but instead of like the tertiary emotions on the third ring, they just kind of have the core and then secondary emotions outside of it, and then on the tertiary part of the circle, sensations that might be affiliated. So I think that that's also such a good tool for clients. And then when they see those sensation words, I think they start to get it. Like there's something about it, like even if they've never done this before, they're just resonating with it.
And I agree, this book is very accessible. It seems, aimed at therapists, but also anyone that's kind of interested in learning about the change triangle. And I was
Mhm.
laughing actually because it's literally called It's Not Always Depression. And I kept being like, oh, I have to read that depression book. And then I started reading it. I'm like, oh, it's literally not that at all. Like,
Nope.
uh,
Nope.
my brain just
Exactly.
was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But so what do you hope readers take away from this book?
I hope that readers take away a very, again, just a very accessible way of handling themselves. I hope readers take away that emotions are not bad, which sounds so corny and therapist-y of me, but they're not, not just that they're not bad, but they are so important. And like that just even we don't even need all this crazy vocab. Like just understanding these seven core emotions. Like that's really all you need. Like can help you live just such a more authentic life and to not be afraid of your emotions. Like one of my favorite fun facts about the book is like most emotions have like a wave of like 45 seconds to 2 minutes. So if you can tolerate that and it might be uncomfortable, like one, you'll live and you'll probably learn something important about you, your wants, your needs, and you'll be able to live more authentically. So that's what I hope readers take away from this. And also clinicians can take away like you can do some really meaningful work with people and you don't need these crazy modalities and interventions. Like these just very practical ways and just showing up authentically as a human can be really effective.
I think the ending in the ending it's literally written and I read it. Emotions just are like hair flip. Like the way that it was written out in the end, it was like just emotions just are, and it's
Mhm.
like, okay,
Mhm.
perfect, right? If that's what we take away from this, that's great.
Yeah. Especially in a world like in a culture that is like, oh my God, like demonizing emotions more and more and more and demonizing empathy and compassion. I'm like, what the hell are we doing? Like, yeah, like emotions are just, they just are. They're normal, they're healthy, and they're important.
And we don't go to therapy to not feel certain emotions. We go to therapy to learn how to tolerate them, right? And I think that's also a piece that it feels important to kind of state because I think for folks that aren't in therapy or don't know much about it, right? I think there's this expectation of like, well, I'm supposed to just feel better all the time now that I'm in therapy.
Oh, which to me is like such a result of our capitalistic overemphasis on happiness and productivity, which I think will segue so well into the next one.
So, the book of your choosing is Decolonizing Therapy, Oppression,
Hmm.
Historical Trauma, and Politicizing Your Practice by Jennifer Mullen. So, let's dig in. Why did you pick this book?
This is big, so I might have to go a bit slow with this one. Also, just recognizing my place is talking about this topic as a cisgender white man, so I just want to be as intentional as possible with this. I chose this book because I think it's something that, whether it's this book or related books and topics, I think all clinicians should be constantly questioning and challenging their perspectives, their education, how they came to have that education, why they sought it out in the first place. I think that that is something that everyone should be doing constantly, and this book embodies that. Like, whether it's decolonizing therapy, decolonizing how we show up in relationships, like decolonizing our businesses. Like, this book just obviously it's just specifically in the therapy space, but it just embodies deconstructing and questioning how things are done, especially systems that are have just proven time and time again to be oppressive and harmful. And I just think it's, again, it's very accessible. It's dense, but it's not super academic and abstract. It's very accessible. So I think it does something very important very effectively.
And for listeners who might not be familiar, I know this is a
Mhm.
giant question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Can
yeah.
you give a little bit of an overview of like the concept of decolonizing therapy or just decolonizing, like you mentioned, like anything, your
Hmm.
work or your practice?
Hmm. I've come to understand it as constantly assessing and looking for where is the power in the room? How is that power being utilized? Just being aware of power dynamics and who has agency in the room. Yeah, I think that because you are right, it is huge, but I think a good way of just capturing it is being mindful of who is having the power, why is that person having the power, should that power be on that end of the spectrum, if you will, and if how is it being utilized? And is it being utilized to maintain a status quo, or is it being used to actually promote self agency and healing? So I know that that's kind of abstract still, but constantly assessing where's the power in the room and how is it being used.
I thought this book was incredible. I was really happy that you picked it. The introduction, I was listening to the audiobook and just kind of yelling, yes, over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And like the introduction to like the ideas, and I found myself taking a lot away from it. Especially interesting, like as it's focusing on the therapy side of things and like the idea of healing versus treating and the wellness model versus like an illness model. And the book sort of dives into like, the history of therapy through time and everything. So just
Mm-hmm.
wondering if you can speak to you, I guess, to your work personally about like healing versus treating and
Mm-hmm.
how reading this book maybe has affected the work that you do.
Yeah. To me, healing is going to the root to in order to bring meaningful change that someone actually wants for themselves. Whereas treating is how can I get someone, coerce someone, even if it's done fluffily and therapeutically, how can I get someone to just kind of maintain the status quo? So, a kind of concrete example I might give is someone coming into therapy and they're presenting concerns are so big that they aren't able to work. Maybe this is manifesting as severe quote unquote depression, right? I would say a illness model would look at getting someone to just be able to control that depression long enough to continue on with the regular. Can you just get to work and then can you just show up as the bare minimum as possible so you can just survive, right? I would say wellness and healing would go to the root and say, okay, what is this depression looking like and feeling like for you? Okay, this isn't just showing up as depression. This is, I literally cannot get out of bed. Okay, what does that feel like? How do you experience that? Okay, it feels like you're just, it's this constant dread, like it's this constant just exhausting feeling of never being able to do enough and you're never going to get there. Okay, like how long has that been there for you? And it's just going deeper and deeper and deeper, and then looking at not just, maybe because there are modalities that do that and they'll get into like that really fine childhood attachment stuff, but it still kind of leaves out this systemic component. So then we'll also bring that in too. So if we're talking about, we get down to like, I've had this feeling since I was young, and my parents, I was alone all the time. My parents left us alone, and because they were always working. we can bring in like, "Oh, okay, yeah, like that's because life is expensive and hard." But even then, that's not enough. We start to really name like systems. Like that is, we have to do it gently because these words have become so politicized, and we have to do it in a way that people's systems can handle. But it's then bringing in like an education of this is why that's happening, and this is how things are. Like, no, this was created by people. But that's kind of the difference between treating an illness versus healing and wellness. Yeah.
No, I think that's good. I think like maybe uh what kind of resonated with me, I guess an example like personally is that there was an area where there was like an Irish example at the beginning. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to think about like, and I thought it was ironic as well as like, oh, I am here in Canada and lived in England as a child. So like my immigration being a constant thing in Ireland and like, but why are
Mm-hmm.
you having to immigrate? And when you go further down to it, it all comes from like the colonial history of like, we were colonized
Mm-hmm.
for such a long time and then didn't have a lot of power and it's just an interesting I thought it was interesting to think of my own history that way and thinking about your parents' generations and things like that. So looking at history alongside with like your personal thing. So I don't know, maybe that might help listeners understand a little bit more as well, but just from my
Yeah.
my own experience.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's that perfect example. Like you start to get into that nitty-gritty childhood elements of therapy, and then you bring in like personal history. It can help give lost or young parts of ourselves such a coherent story and understanding. And yeah, I appreciate you bringing that in. I've thought about it with personally, like, similarly with my family's lineage, coming over from Italy, and they're living in New York, downstate, and then upstate, and their experiences with poverty, and that how that created and removal of like our culture, like no longer teaching the language and assimilating and all these things, and how that manifested in different harmful generational patterns of like all this rage and avoidance and stuff that gets passed down. Like that's not getting passed down from nowhere. Like that has a root, that has a start point. So I really appreciate you bringing in that personal component. I think that helps conceptualize it really well.
I also think that I mean, I think people are starting to understand generational trauma more and like the epigenetics of how we actually physically carry the trauma from our ancestors in our body. But that can
Mm-hmm.
also be a really overwhelming experience
Mm-hmm.
to feel and understand and conceptualize on both the parts of you that are maybe were like the parts of you that were colonized historically, and then the parts of you that were also like the colonizer, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
think that it can feel, once you start to really feel it, it can feel very big and overwhelming. And I think that this book is like bringing that forth in a way that is, yeah, your ancestors are in the room with you. And I think when
Mm-hmm.
people go into therapy, depending on who the person and sort of the type of therapy they're going into, historically, a lot of our models are not honoring that whatsoever. And now there's a shift. I mean, I'm sure there's been a shift in the past, but like it's very present right now of no,
Mm-hmm.
your ancestors are here with you in the parts that feel guilt, shame, etc. for who your ancestors are or their parts of their identity and the parts of you that are, maybe colonized in the past. Like it's all kind of in this room with us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You'd be incredibly overwhelming. That's why I think that the bringing in that empathic component here is so big with the part you said of like both the being colonized and becoming the colonizer in a lot of ways. I sometimes, because it can be so big, I sometimes start to bring it back to personal examples. Like I might say, well, this is not necessarily anything maybe you haven't already experienced. This concept, someone might be coming in like, my father was abusive and now I'm finding myself doing the same things and I don't want to. I'm like, so we already have, just on a more micro level, this happens. And so then I might connect it back up. Again, I'll use a personal component. Like I might say, yeah, our ancestors were colonized and we had to assimilate and we totally whitewashed our culture and whatnot. And then we will perpetuate that onto other people. And that's not to excuse that. We're not going to endorse that behavior, but we can bring in an empathic understanding that that was birthed out of survival. That's what our ancestors thought that they had to do. And so then, of course, we're going to internalize that. And when we see people not living colonized, that becomes a threat in our system. And so, again, this is not an endorsement or saying it's okay, you're just doing what you know, but it's just a way of starting to bring in that empathic understanding for ourselves.
Yeah, I
So, yeah.
liked this book. Something that stayed with me was that if we're not made to feel uncomfortable, how will we change? And I
Mm-hmm.
think just as you were saying there in the discomfort, it can be hard for people to be in, but you're not going to, as it says, to change anything if you're not really sitting with the discomfort of the systems that exist or your peace within them. And I guess, do you have any advice for people that to are maybe stuck in sitting in the discomfort or afraid to be uncomfortable in some of these grander
Yeah.
societal constructs?
Yeah, I think that this is, I'll be so honest, this is something that I am still working through. I think I start by normalizing the discomfort. I'll say these are not topics that are not just not discussed, but are actively discouraged. So I would say that your discomfort is normal, it's expected, doesn't mean you are a bad person or that you don't want to do this. I think that it's just new and on a biological evolutionary level, anything that is going to shake up a foundation, whether that foundation is inherently good or bad, can be jarring for anybody. Your discomfort is, I would say, just a human experience. We are not defined by the systems that are inform our lives. Like that's not you as a person. Now if you start to do this work and you start to recognize the harm and you see that and you're understanding where it's coming from and actively deciding to go against it or to avoid it, that's problematic. And again, that's probably for a reason because this is discomforting. But if we want to show up and improve, not just as individuals but as a society, like this is what we have to do. And I kind of like, I might bring in some kind of, easy, very easy metaphor of like going to the gym. You're not going to improve if you don't experience some level of discomfort. So that's kind of, again, that is one where I would never claim to be an expert on. I think that that's something that I'm still working with.
Well, thank you for modeling your own, let me call it like being and process with it.
Hmm.
I think that's important for listeners as we talk about these books. We're not experts on all of these things, and
Hmm.
I appreciate you sort of taking a minute and saying, like, okay, this is something that I'm still working on,
Yeah.
right? I think that is such a good way to kind of model, to your point, the constantly like questioning
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
ourselves. And so I appreciate you taking a minute to state that.
I just want to shout out, like, there's some creators who I think have just done such amazing work and are able to articulate these concepts so beautifully. Obviously, Dr. Jennifer Mullen, she's brilliant. One creator Her name is Pat, radical therapist. And then also Dr. Rachel Martin. She is fantastic. He goes by Shaheem on all platforms. I think it's the S is five and then Hahem. Love Shaheem. They're all brilliant, and the way they talk about these topics are so just digestible, and so I always like to shout out people who inform my understanding of this. I think that's especially this topic. Consider especially. I always like to just honor where I get my understanding of these things. So I just want to shout them out.
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing different voices like into this conversation, like into like to your point that you named in the beginning, we're like a group of white folks talking about this
Mhm.
topic, and I'm glad that you're introducing other voices to continue the conversation, and I'll also kind of share a little bit about, how who you seek for knowledge. I guess that brings me into a question of like, if if you're I almost said consumer of therapy, but I guess I
Mhm.
guess it could
Yeah.
be if you're a consumer of therapy and you are interested in working with someone who, like a mental health practitioner in any form that might be actively working to decolonize their practice, like, do you have any advice for how to go about seeking someone doing that work?
One of the therapists who I just mentioned, Pat Radical Therapist, she created what's called a liberatory wellness network, I believe it's called, and she has clinicians who have started registering with this, who resonate with a decolonized approach and take a decolonized approach. So I always like to refer people to this. I believe Psychology Today like actually has a filter now where you can whether it's decolonizing or an anti-oppression lens. I think they have filter options, but I always say to people, take Psychology Today with a grain of salt because people just be clicking every box on
Hmm.
there. But I know that that's on there. And then also, if you're therapist shopping, request a consult call. That's so normal and okay. I would say that first, if you get a I don't do that or I don't do free consult calls, I would take that just as I would just probably not go with that therapist as it is
Hmm.
perfectly because right there someone's just trying to gain some sense of safety, and if you're being denied that out the gate, I don't like to shame anyone, but that would to me would just be a big red flag. But if you are able to secure a consult call, or even if you can't, and it's the first session, the intake, is that it is so okay to ask questions explicitly. And I just want to also recognize that that can be very scary because these are also topics that have become so politicized. They should not, I mean, just given our climate, it's inherently political. It shouldn't be, but it is. So I could just want to recognize that it can be very uncomfortable, but it's so okay to ask questions explicit, like, who did you vote for? Like, starting with that, that is so okay.
Hmm.
It's okay to ask, like, what's your stance on a decolonized therapeutic lens? Like, if someone cannot answer that or has no understanding of it, I would say that not that that is a bad therapist or a bad person. It just may not be the right space for you. Asking things like, what's your stance on abortion, on the Black Lives Matter movement, on
Hmm.
Palestine? Like, these are all just, depending on how they answer, will probably give you a look into where this person is on that decolonizing process.
Hmm.
So I would say ask questions.
Yeah, I think big emphasis on that, like ask the questions that
Mhm.
feel close to your heart, and it's okay to this is where it's like, let's sit back in our change triangle and like sit in the discomfort of
Mhm.
maybe asking a stranger a challenging question, but knowing
Mhm.
that that's something that's important to you. I think in general, feeling like you can ask questions in these consultation calls, and of course when you're working together, is like you should be doing that, right?
Hmm.
It's good for you to name it though, because sometimes it feels like, no,
Right.
but the therapist is the question asker,
Right.
So
Hmm.
from this side, I'm
Hmm.
like,
Exactly.
wait, am I allowed? So that's good to know that, like, yeah, you should be really trying to find somebody that's going to match exactly what you're looking for, because you're going to
Hmm.
spend so much time with this person if you're really trying to work on something.
Hmm. Oh my gosh, yeah. And that just kind of, when you said the phrase of like, am I allowed to? I think that goes back to this concept of where is the power in the room?
Hmm.
And if you are asking these questions and you are immediately met with defensiveness or an overemphasis on neutrality, God, I mean, my body just gets entire it discomforted just at the idea of that. Like, to me, that would just kind of say, like, okay, there is going to be a power imbalance here, and you're not allowed to question it, just go along with it. And I'm like, ooh, that's not giving decolonized at all, at
Hmm.
all. So yeah, ask questions.
I guess in closing on this book, there's like a lot here in this book that we could touch on, but is there
Mhm.
anything else that you wanted to bring forth that we haven't touched on today, or anything about this book that inspires you?
I just think it's what's so inspiring is that it gives such explicit permission and validation again to question everything, to deprogram everything, even if you end up deprogramming it and for you it's like, I'm okay with this, it's not harming me or anyone else, we're okay doing this, whatever that might be. I just think this book just gives such explicit permission to do that, and not just that it's okay, but that it's something we should be doing. And I think that that is just so, I mean, talk about like just a weight off of someone's shoulders, both the
Hmm.
clinician and the client. I feel like it's just also such a permission giver to show up authentically, like that there are no right ways of being human and helping other humans, as long as there is, it's a democratized process, there is an equal level playing field, there is consent and safety, there's no right or wrong way of going about it. That's what I think is so very inspiring about this piece of work.
Thank you so much for chatting with us today and bringing both of these books forward. I think there's particularly this book, it's like I
Mhm.
feel like we've scratched the surface in terms
Oh,
of conversation, right? Like,
yeah.
but I like I'm this is a book that wasn't around when I was in grad school, and I was like picturing myself reading this alongside coursework and just how that
Mhm.
would shift from the beginning, maybe the ways that I was taught or how I would question things. And so I really appreciate you bringing this book and both books forward. Where can people find you online on socials, or if they are interested in working with you? Sounds like you're booked and busy, but if you have any space, where can people find you?
Most
Yeah.
popular therapist.
On TikTok, my ad is just Nick NJ Therapist. And then on Instagram, which I have not been as active on for a myriad of reasons, it's just Nicholas Rissone LSW. If you are interested in working with me, I do have some availability because I think a lot of people submitting in intake forms, I don't think they fully understand how like state laws and
Sure.
licensing work. So I do have some availability, and in all my bios there's a link tree, and in the link tree there is a page that will bring you to our intake form. So if you are in New Jersey, anywhere, I can work with you via telehealth. And then if you're interested in person, I predominantly serve the kind of shore area or central Jersey. So if you're in Jersey, you know what I mean with that.
Thanks for listening to Books from Your Therapist. If you're interested in the books we talked about, we'll include links in our show notes. If you'd like to reach out to us with your own recommendations or are a mental health practitioner interested to come on to share, you can email us at booksfromyourtherapist@gmail.com. Follow us on socials. We're at Books From Your Therapist on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And you can follow me on Substack if you would like to read along. I'm just at Tara Kremen.
Happy constantly questioning who has the power in the room.
Happy not being scared of the discomfort, sitting in your emotions, They'll pass in 45 seconds to 2 minutes.